Welcome to the Crimson Engine. My name is Rubidium. Today we are looking at the difference between Stedicams or Steadicam-like mechanical stabilizers and gimbals or electronic stabilizers. Alright, first off the bat, I know that the Stedicam is a trademarked name. There are lots of other things like the Stedicam out there, just as like there are lots of different brands of brushless gimbals, Movi and Ronin being the two most dominant. I'm just going to use the term gimbal and Stedicam, and you guys are just going to have to understand that I mean those two families of stabilizers. So let's start with Stedicams. This was invented in 1975 to carry around a 35mm film camera, to give it freedom, to give it movement, to basically free it from the tripod and the dolly, and give smoother movement than just putting it on your shoulder. It very quickly was used by a whole bunch of filmmakers. It won an Oscar for technical innovation, and it's still being used to this day, which is a pretty amazing achievement in an industry where, you know, new cameras and new sensors and new lenses are coming out almost every month. The first thing you need to know about the Steadicam is that it is a mechanical solution. It has springs and hinges. It relies on the inertia of the weight of the camera sled, which is what the vertical pole that the camera is mounted on is called. And the operator wears a vest that redistributes the weight of the camera, the monitor, the batteries over their shoulders and hips. So it makes it a lot easier to hold because you're holding it with your whole body rather than your hands, your arms, your shoulders. The Isoelastic Arm, which is the 2 or 3 or 4 piece arm coming off the vest, isolates the movements of the operator from the camera, and you don't really hold it tight. You sort of gently touch it as lightly as possible as you move around and aim with it, and it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of training. It is a very steep learning curve to use a Steadicam, and the people that know how to do it are in really high demand. They charge a lot of money, and because of that, it costs a lot to hire them on set. The first handheld brushless gimbal that I'm aware of was the Movi 10. It was released in 2013, so it's only 5 or 6 years old. It adapted a previous technology that was used on helicopters and on cars to isolate the motion of the mount from the camera. It's a series of 3 motors on 3 different axes. What it does is sense the movement of the camera hundreds of times a second, and if it sees that the camera is moving one way, it activates the motion of the motor to move the other way, compensating and eliminating the motion from the camera. Like a lot of things based on computers, the brushless gimbal had a lot of points of failure originally. It was pretty unreliable, but also like a lot of things based on computers, its stage of development was incredibly quick. Lots of different people came out with different versions of it. There were different patents filed. Gimbals get lighter and stronger. They have a higher payload. They're easy to use. They're more resilient, more reliable almost every year as the electronics inside them improve and the computers that run them improve. Whereas the Steadicam has pretty much been the same for 45 years and it's not going anywhere. So let's start with the gimbals, their advantages and disadvantages. Gimbals are smaller, lighter, more transportable, easier to use and easier to set up. Now, I say easier, they're not easy. They still have quite a learning curve to get good with them. They still take quite a lot of strength to move with. Their major disadvantage is that they can only take small camera payloads because the motors that stabilize the cameras have to be quite small because you still have to carry them as well as the camera. They can only handle a certain amount of weight. When the Movi 10 was first released, that was about 10 pounds. Now you have brushless gimbal systems that can take up to 25 pounds or above, but that means that you have to hold 25 pounds plus the weight of the gimbal, which may be another 10 or 15 pounds in your hands for the length of the shot. And you may have to do that shot after shot. Another big disadvantage of the gimbals is they don't compensate for the up and down movement of walking. You actually have to take the bobbing out of your step by yourself by doing what's called the duck walk, whereas Steadicams are really great at taking this out, and you can even run with a Steadicam and get smooth motion. So Steadicams, on the other hand, can hold a much larger payload, and that's why they were developed first when cameras were bigger. A Movi Pro or a Ronin 2 will probably set you back around $6,500. So they're cheaper, but not cheap. By the time you've bought all the batteries and accessories and chargers that you need, you're probably looking around $8,000. Whereas a fully set up Steadicam is about $45,000. Because of the way that the camera is held on the operator's body, you can also shoot for longer with the Steadicam. You can get longer takes, you can get more takes in a day because it's not as taxing on the operator's arms and shoulders. The disadvantage of the Steadicam, apart from their expense, is that they take longer to balance the camera. They take longer to learn how to use. In fact, Steadicam operators spend months, sometimes years, in apprenticeships with other operators learning their craft. In the last couple of years, hybrid systems have emerged that put a gimbal on the end of a Steadicam. These things try and give you the best of both worlds, but they also give you the worst of both worlds. They are more complex, require more training, and are more expensive. ARRI has an amazing system called the Trinity, which is essentially a brushless gimbal on the end of a Steadicam arm. There are only a couple of people that I've heard of that know how to use them, and the system starts at $65,000. I think both of these systems will continue to get better as time goes on, but it's the brushless gimbal that's going to evolve quicker because it's based on computers. Every year, the capacity that the motors can handle gets larger. Every year, people develop more ways to mitigate the downsides and increase the upsides. I would personally be surprised if we're still using Steadicam-like units in the next 45 years. But as it stands, both systems do an amazing job. They both give a different type of movement, and they both have a place on the film sets of the future. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave your questions in the comments, and I will see you next time.